Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I was so silly to think that my whirlwind romance with Brad would have a happy ending. We had met on that trendy new dating app Hinge, which my friends assured me was more relationship-oriented than the hookup free-for-all on Tinder. Brad's profile caught my eye right away with his rugged good looks, chiseled jawline, piercing blue eyes, and muscular frame. His bio made him seem charming and witty too. We started messaging and hit it off instantly, bonding over our shared interest in horror films and dark humor. After a week or so of nonstop messaging and flirting, Brad finally asked me out on a proper date. My stomach fluttered with excitement as I agreed to meet him that Friday night at Marcello's, this hip new Italian restaurant downtown. I spent all week daydreaming about our date and trying on potential outfits. By the time Friday rolled around, I had butterflies in my stomach as I got ready, taking extra care to look hot for Brad. I ironed my floral wrap dress, did my makeup flawlessly, and took time to curl and style my long brown hair into loose, tumbling waves. Slipping on strappy heels, I checked myself out in the mirror and was thrilled with how the whole look came together. I'd arrived at Marcello's early and slid into a table by the window so I could watch for Brad's arrival. I ordered a glass of Chianti and sipped it slowly, wondering if he was as excited for this date as I was. Right on time, I saw him striding down the sidewalk toward the restaurant entrance. My breath caught in my throat. He looked even better in person. Over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that strained against his gray button-down shirt, Brad had an athletic build and moved with a masculine grace. His dark hair was artfully tousled, and when he stepped inside making eye contact with me, those sapphire blue eyes sparkled. I stood up on wobbly legs and he pulled me into a warm, enveloping hug. He smelled amazing, a woodsy cologne that made my knees weak. Pulling back to get a better look at him, I smiled brightly. This date was off to a very promising start. We settled into an easy rapport right away, covering all the basics like what we each did for work, where we grew up, and our families. I was relieved to find that Brad was just as funny, charming, and quick-witted as he'd been over text and Hinge chat. We both ordered the spinach ravioli, which we shared in a romantic Lady and the Tramp pasta moment. I blushed when our noses bumped together, feeling that first spark of attraction. After we polished off the tiramisu for dessert, Brad suggested heading back to his place for a nightcap. I tried to ignore the nervous flutter in my stomach as I agreed. He was just so attractive, and I definitely wanted to keep the date going. We Ubered over to this trendy downtown apartment building, and he gave me a short tour of his place, which was all modern furniture and masculine decor. Very chic, just like him. We opened a bottle of Malbec and curled up together on his plush gray suede couch, chatting and laughing easily. When Brad leaned in for our first kiss, I melted into it, the wine making me feel warm and loose. Maybe this would turn into a sleepover, I thought naughtily. Just then, the front door banged open violently, jolting me from my romantic haze. A petite brunette stormed in looking very upset. I froze in shock at her sudden entrance as she continued expressing her anger at Brad about his betrayal. He seemed just as stunned, appearing confused about why she had arrived unannounced. My mind was spinning trying to make sense of this nightmarish scenario. It slowly dawned on me that this must be Brad's ex-girlfriend, and clearly their relationship was not as over as he had led me to believe. I sat there slack-jawed, watching the heated argument unfolding before me. The woman berated Brad for having another woman over so soon, insisting she come by to pick up her things. Their vitriolic fight continued, escalating until the bedroom door creaked open. Suddenly, an adorable fluffy brown and white dog came scampering out, drawn by the commotion. The woman immediately took off after the energetic pup as it ran for the still open front door, with Brad fast on her heels. Rufus. "Stop," he yelled desperately. It was my chance to escape this catastrophic scene. I grabbed my purse and slipped out the door behind them, rushing on wobbly heels down the stairs as fast as I could. I heard Brad shouting something after me, but didn't stop to make out what it was. I had to get away from the embarrassment and shock unfolding back in that apartment. I hurried down the dark street, mind swirling as I tried to process everything. How could Brad deceive me like that? He'd never once mentioned he was freshly out of a relationship. I felt like such an idiot for falling for his charming act and believing we had a real connection. Once I got a few blocks away, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called an Uber. As the car rolled up, tears stung my eyes and a lump formed in my throat. The night had started out so romantic and fun. How it had gone so horribly wrong. I shot Brad a scathing text about his deceitfulness as the Uber whisked me home. He immediately blew up my phone with apologies and explanations. That he and his ex had been broken up for a month. She was just having trouble accepting it. But I didn't believe his lies and excuses, especially not a week later when I saw on Instagram that they were officially back together. The worst part came a couple months later when I got a message from Brad on Hinge acting like nothing dramatic had happened. He clearly had zero remorse for humiliating me and was trying to line up his next conquest. I angrily told him off for being a lying, manipulative creep before promptly blocking him. The entire experience left me feeling foolish for overlooking red flags in my excitement about Brad. I vowed to be much more cautious about who I met from dating apps going forward, but at least the story of running out on that disaster date gave my friends a good laugh. They couldn't believe the audacity of Brad and his crazy ex. All I could do was shake my head and be thankful I got out of there fast enough to avoid any more trauma. So much for my dream Hinge romance. Turns out swiping right can still lead to trouble. I was really looking forward to my date with Derek. We had been chatting online for a couple of weeks and he seemed totally normal, friendly, thoughtful, and easy to talk to. His dating profile showed pictures of a cute guy with warm brown eyes and a kind smile. His bio mentioned that he enjoyed exercising, trying new restaurants, and going to museums. Pretty generic interests, but nothing struck me as odd. When Derek suggested meeting up for coffee, I readily agreed. We decided on a trendy little independent cafe I'd been wanting to check out downtown. I got there a few minutes early and grabbed a table at a window so I could watch for him to arrive. Right on time, I saw it by fitting Derek's description stroll up and come inside. I waved, and he broke into a grin, headed over. Up close, Derek looked just like his pictures. Average height and build, casually dressed in jeans and a sweater, very boy next door. We exchanged slightly awkward hellos and ordered our drinks. So far, so good. Things were going smoothly as we began chatting over our lats. The conversation started off light, as first dates often do. We covered the basics, where we were each from originally, schools, jobs, pop culture we enjoyed. Derek seemed a little shy at first, but gradually opened up more. After we had covered the routine get-to-know-you topics, Derek asked what hobbies I enjoyed. I talked about reading fantasy novels, taking my dog to the park, and binge-watching shows on Netflix. When I asked what he liked to do for fun, Derek said he had an extensive garden that he enjoyed tending. I figured he meant typical gardening, tomatoes, peppers, flowers, etc., but as he talked more, it became clear there was a specific plant he specialized in cultivating. Derek spoke vaguely at first about growing unique plants, but his eyes lit up when he started describing the fulfillment he got from caring for these special flowers. He used evocative terms like mind-expanding and consciousness-altering that hinted at something beyond typical gardening. I wasn't totally sure where he was going with this flower talk. Was he just using flowery language to describe everyday greenery? But then Derek outright said how pivotal these homegrown flowers were to opening his mind to deeper truths and aligning himself with the rhythms of the universe. He credited these blossoms with igniting his creativity and helping him see the infinite interconnectedness of all living beings. Okay, so definitely not your average petunias and pansies. It slowly dawned on me that good old Derek here was definitely alluding to growing copious amounts of weed. The magical flowers he spoke of with such reverence and awe were 100% marijuana plants. And apparently he had a lot of them. He casually referenced having several grow rooms in his house solely dedicated to cultivating premium pot. This was no small hobbyist setup. Derek was describing a full-blown botanical cannabis operation. And not only did he grow massive quantities of marijuana, Derek was also consuming it in equally huge amounts daily. He extolled the life-changing benefits he received from smoking premium homegrown bud morning, noon, and night. Hitting high wasn't just a casual activity for Derek, it was his entire purpose, a singular lens through which he viewed life. Everything traced back to how smoking massive quantities of weed enabled him to tap into dormant parts of his mind, unfettered creativity, and profound spiritual insights. The way he described it, you'd think cannabis held the secrets of the universe. I started to wonder if this guy was high right now, or if he ever came down from his THC-induced highs long enough to function normally. Suffice to say, I did not see this date taking such an intense turn towards discussing Derek's top-tier pot production and consumption habits. The more he monologued about the central importance of getting super stoned, the more uncomfortable I felt. I tried subtly changing topics, but Derek always brought it back to weed. By the time we finished our coffees, I couldn't wait to make a polite but swift exit. Derek seemed oblivious to how awkward and intense his weed worship had become. When the check came, he conveniently forgot his wallet and looked at me expectantly to pick up the tab. Nice try, buddy. I paid for the drinks just so I could leave sooner. As we walked out, Derek said we should definitely meet up again soon. I gave a non-committal yeah, maybe, knowing there was no way I'd subject myself to round 2 of Derek's cannabis crusade. I breathed a sigh of relief as I drove home, happy to have escaped. In hindsight, I probably should have picked up on the warning signs. Derek's mysterious herbal wellness nonprofit job, his talk of expanding consciousness. But how was I to know this seemingly normal guy would turn out to be a total stoner whose only interests were getting baked 24/7? Lesson learned, I'm now extra vigilant about asking pointed questions about weed and drug use when chatting with potential dates. I will not sit through another first date monologue about the mind-blowing insights gained from growing massive amounts of marijuana. Fool me once, shame on Derek and his magical cannabis flowers. Here's hoping the next single guy I meet has some normal hobbies that don't involve altered states of consciousness. Maybe he's into sports or video games or model trains. Anything that we can actually bond over and have an engaging conversation about. I want a relationship with shared interests and values, not partnership founded on supplying each other with primo weed. Don't get me wrong, I have no issue with responsible, occasional cannabis use. But Derek took it to a whole other level. Clearly he had built his entire identity and worldview around being an ultra-stoned ganja goblin. I need someone more well-rounded who doesn't base their whole personality around obsessing over a particular plant. For that reason, I haven't been back in the dating for a while. I hope I don't bump into any more addicts. I had seen her around the office plenty of times before. She worked a few floors below me in the accounting department while I was in the marketing team. Our paths didn't cross too often, but when they did, I always made sure to smile and say hello. She seemed friendly enough and was certainly easy on the eyes. When she asked me to go out sometime after chatting in the break room, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I had been wanting to get to know her better, and a casual dinner date seemed like the perfect opportunity. I suggested a cozy Italian place downtown that I knew she would love. The restaurant was intimate but not too romantic, ideal for a simple first date. The day arrived and I took extra care getting ready, making sure my outfit was sharp and my hair was styled just right. I felt a flutter of anticipation as I drove to the restaurant, eager to learn more about this lovely coworker. When I arrived, she was already seated at a table in the corner. My breath caught as I took in how stunning she looked. The dim lighting made her eyes sparkle and brought out the honeyed highlights in her hair. We exchanged slightly awkward hellos and settled into our seats across from each other. The conversation began smoothly enough, sticking to safe topics like work and hometowns. She seemed totally normal, if a bit shy and soft-spoken. I started to relax, thinking this would be an enjoyable, low-key evening. About halfway through the meal, though, things started to get strange. Her responses became clipped and erratic, veering into odd tangents. She would trail off mid-sentence and stare past me with an unsettling, vacant look in her eyes. When she did speak, the things she said were increasingly bizarre and nonsensical. It was like she was in her own little world, and I was simply an afterthought. I stumbled through the one-sided conversation, nodding and trying to keep an open mind. Maybe she was just nervous or awkward on first dates. But then she started muttering under her breath and even giggling to herself in a way that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Other diners began to notice, shooting puzzled glances in our direction. I felt my face flush hot with embarrassment. The real shock came when, right in the middle of our entrees, she suddenly grabbed a bread roll from the basket on our table and flung it violently across the room. It hit the opposite wall with a loud thwack, crumbling to the floor. She didn't even seem to register what she had done, continuing to ramble in her own little bubble like nothing was amiss. I froze, mouth agape, utterly bewildered by what I had just witnessed. The other patrons went silent, all eyes darting between the mysterious girl and the hurled bread roll. A few nervous titters broke the tension, but most were simply stunned. The waiters buzzed anxiously, realizing they had a problematic situation on their hands. Before I could collect myself or come up with a response, she had already moved on to her next target, the salad sitting untouched on my plate. With no warning, she reached across the table and swept the entire thing onto the floor in one swift motion. Greens and vegetables went flying everywhere. The crash of shattering dishware cracked through the air. At this point, the staff had clearly had enough. The manager rushed over and politely but firmly stated we would need to leave. Face burning with humiliation, I quickly threw some cash on the table and hurried my date out the door. She seemed completely oblivious to the fact that she was the cause of our sudden exit. Once outside, I awkwardly tried to ask what was going on and if she was feeling all right. Her replies were noncommittal and laced with strange giggles. It was painfully clear at this point that something was very off. I mumbled some excuse about needing to get home early that night and we parted ways. I drove off shaken, playing the night's events over and over in my head. What on earth had I just witnessed? The next day, I arrived at work uneasy and on edge. The disastrous date plagued my thoughts, and I wondered if I would run into the girl from accounting. To my surprise, I was summoned to my boss's office first thing that morning. His expression was grim as he relayed an alarming piece of news. My date from last night had filed a complaint claiming I assaulted her at dinner. I stood there flabbergasted, struggling to find the words to defend myself. I recounted the whole bizarre tale, the thrown food, the nonsensical ramblings, her detached demeanor. Thankfully, my boss knew about the girl's reputation for erratic behavior and attention-seeking stunts. He believed me, saying this wasn't the first complaint against her that later proved false. I left his office awash with relief but also renewed unease. How could someone fabricate something so terrible and damaging? I avoided her at all costs in the aftermath, not wanting to give her any more opportunities to wreak havoc. With time, the gossip died down and I was able to move past the mortifying encounter. But every so often, I'll see her in passing. Just a glimpse, a blur, and feel a chill down my spine. Some first dates you just can't forget, no matter how hard you try. I was an innocent freshman when I met Jake in my intro to psychology class. With his tousled brown hair and dimpled smile, he seemed like the quintessential boy next door. We'd chat casually before lectures, bonding over coffee orders and complaints about our professor's monotonous voice. When Jake asked for my number after class one day, I gladly gave it to him, giddy at the prospect of my first college date. The night Jake called to ask me out, I curled up in my dorm bed cradling the phone, my roommate Jess smirking knowingly from across the room. We decided on dinner that Friday night at a new Italian restaurant downtown. I spent hours picking out the perfect first date outfit. A slinky black dress that highlighted my curves, strappy heels that elongated my legs. I couldn't wait to get dolled up, channeling the sophisticated Mulder Fatel vibe. The restaurant Jake picked seemed classy and romantic, with dim lighting and intimate circular booths tucked into corners. I imagined us chatting effortlessly over pasta, knees nudging beneath the tablecloth, the charming college boy wooing me in a setting worthy of a movie montage. When Friday finally rolled around, I was a ball of nervous excitement. Jess helped me fix my hair into glossy waves and loaned me a sparkly Barrett. "He won't be able to take his eyes off you," she squealed. We danced around the dorm room to peppy pop songs, giggling over our shared anticipation. Right on time, Jake pulled up outside my dorm in a sleek hatchback. I waved goodbye to Jess, floating down the stairs into the crisp fall night. Jake greeted me with a grin, holding the passenger door open for me. "You look amazing," he effused, eyes trailing over my figure-hugging dress. I smiled coyly back at him, easing into the leather seat. We drove to the restaurant chatting lightly about classes and movies, Jake's hand resting casually on my knee. He pulled into a spot down the street from the trendy Italian place, its windows glowing warmly in the dusk. Jake stepped out and rushed to open my door. playing the part of perfect gentleman. As we strolled up the sidewalk, his hand pressed against my lower back, guiding but also claiming. I dismissed the small warning pangs these gestures stirred, brushing them off as harmless chivalry. The cozy ambiance of the restaurant enveloped us as the hostess led us to a circular booth tucked away from the main floor. Jake ordered an expensive bottle of red wine before I could even glance at the list. I hesitated, since I didn't usually drink much, but soon my head was swimming pleasantly from the rich, heady wine. Jake launched into intensely personal questions, fixating on my dating history. His gaze bored into me, never straying as he pressed for exact numbers and vivid details. My cheeks flushed crimson, but the wine had unlocked something in me. Secrets I wouldn't normally confess tumbled out under Jake's probing intensity. But the more I revealed, the more intrusive Jake's questions became. He demanded to know my ex-boyfriend's names, how far we'd gone physically, if any had broken my heart. I squirmed under his relentless stare, made cagey by wine and embarrassment. Jake grew agitated the more I demurred, reframing his questions to trap me in some kind of lie or contradiction. When our entrees arrived, I longed for a distraction, stupidly believing food would temper Jake's invasive interrogation. But he continued peppering me between bites, about past relationships, my family, my insecurities and dreams. His leg pressed against mine under the table, trapping me bodily as his questions probed places I preferred kept private. I glanced around desperately for our waiter, but we were tucked too far in the shadows. Jake's paranoia began to emerge as the bottle emptied. He became convinced other men were staring at me, the waiter, a bald man dining alone, even an elderly patron. Is he someone you know? An ex maybe. Jake demanded each time, his tone laced with jealousy. When I assured him no, he grew incensed, certain I was lying. By the time Jake grabbed the check, the charming veneer he'd arrived with had cracked completely. His eyes blazed with mingled desire and fury. When he grasped my hand unexpectedly, I recoiled, but this only enraged him further. Don't play coy now. You didn't mind my attention earlier, he spat out. Fear jolted through me at his sudden venomous tone, the glint of violence in his eyes beneath the romantic dim lighting. When Jake clamped down harder on my wrist, instinct took over. I wrenched myself free of his grasp and bolted for the door, leaving my phone and purse behind in reckless haste. I sprinted down the sidewalk until I reached a busy street where I could hail a cab. The bright yellow taxi was a lifeline, whisking me safely away with Jake's shouts echoing after me. I collapsed against the sticky pleather seat, hands shaking in relief. Later that night, I recounted the traumatic evening to Jess between halting sips of chamomile tea. She listened in horror, cradling me in her arms as I spilled out every sordid detail, now clear warning signs I'd overlooked. You poor thing. Thank God you got out of there. Jess smoothed my hair and soothed me until I finally succumbed to a fitful sleep riddled with visions of Jake's menacing glare. In the sober light of morning, Jake's behavior terrified me even more. I realized I'd escaped narrowly from a bullet hole controlling man. Jess insisted I couldn't have known his true nature until his facade cracked. But I still felt foolish. There must have been small signs I'd missed or dismissed, little tests to gauge how much control I'd relinquish. I took precautions over the next few weeks. Changed my number, kept pepper spray handy, avoided walking alone at night. Jake's handsome mask had concealed a predatory cruelty I couldn't forget. I saw men differently after that, noticing the warning signs, pressing me for info, growing jealous or resentful. At the first red flag, I'd withdraw, learning to trust those instincts around any guy who seemed off. I should have known from the start that the intoxicating illusion of perfection I saw that night at the club would shatter in the harsh light of day. Under the surface, things are rarely as they appear. The scene was electric, pulsing music, flashing lights, gyrating bodies, and free-flowing alcohol. An intoxicating atmosphere of fun and fantasy pervaded the space. Inhibitions lowered, conversation flowed, flirtations abounded. For one night, the real world ceased to exist. All that mattered in that moment was having a good time. My eyes scanned the crowded dance floor, taking in the sights and sounds. They landed on her, this bombshell of a girl effortlessly swaying her hips to the driving beat. She had legs for miles that stretched on endlessly, barely contained in a tiny sequined miniskirt that left little to the imagination. Her top clung to every sensual curve, flashing glimpses of taut abs and ample cleavage with each movement. Luscious dark curls cascaded freely over her shoulders, bouncing in time with her body. She moved with a hypnotic, sensual grace. Even under the layers of dramatic makeup, her beauty radiated. She was easily the most stunning girl in the club. Our eyes met across the pulsing sea of bodies. She flashed a coy yet inviting smile. I decided to seize the moment and make my move. Maneuvering through the crowded dance floor, I reached her side just as the music climaxed. Up close, she was even more spectacular. Feline eyes lined in black winked flirtatiously. Pillowy lips coated in red parted in a dazzling smile. Her laugh rang out like velvet over the music. We exchanged names, our voices nearly drowned out by the deafening beat. Her name was Brittany. We danced, and our chemistry was instant. Movements in sync, hands tentatively touching, eyes frequently meeting. She was captivating. All my cheesy pickup lines had her throwing her head back in delighted laughter. As the night went on, we drifted closer. Her hands slid teasingly across my chest and shoulders. By last call, we had exchanged numbers with promises to meet up again soon. I felt like the luckiest guy on earth. In the following days, I agonized endlessly over the perfect text to send her, flirty yet aloof, interested but not overeager. I finally settled on a breezy message asking about her week. To my delight, she responded right away, suggesting dinner that weekend. I made reservations at Petite Bistro, a trendy French restaurant downtown. Saturday arrived and I pulled up outside her apartment, heart pounding in anticipation. The door swung open and there she stood, looking as radiant as I remembered. The curve-hugging red dress highlighted every inch of her phenomenal figure. Skyscraper black heels accentuated her sculpted, endless legs. Her hair fell in artfully tousled waves, not a strand out of place. Dramatic smoky eyes and red lips completed the bombshell look. She was runway ready and then some. We arrived at the restaurant fashionably late, all eyes turning to take in this exquisite creature on my arm. Jaws dropped and whispers followed in our wake. The male waitstaff fawned over her, falling over themselves to fulfill her requests. I was bursting with pride at having landed such an unbelievable dream girl. This stunning specimen wanted me. Dinner began smoothly as we sipped wine by candlelight. The conversation ebbed and flowed easily, punctuated by her melodic laugh. I regaled her with amusing work stories, and she batted her long false lashes, utterly enraptured by my mundane anecdotes. So far, so perfect. Then the waiter arrived to take our order, and something shifted. Brittany requested nearly every item from the extensive menu. She asked for multiple appetizers, the most expensive entrees, each with extra sides and sauces. She wanted more bread baskets, drinks, add-ins, substitutions. The list went on and on. I tried not to appear too stunned as she piled on dish after dish with no regard for price or excess. When the comically abundant food arrived, Brittany descended on it ravenously. She shoveled heaps of escargot, steak, pasta, and creme brulee into her mouth with barely a pause between bites. Lips smacking noisily, food spilled everywhere as she ate with a primal intensity. Loud slurping and scarfing sounds filled the air as she worked through plate after plate. Other patrons began shooting disapproving glances over at the grotesque display unfolding at our table. Whispers of disgusting and what terrible manners reached my burning ears. I sank lower in my seat, utterly mortified by her revolting table behavior. This was not the elegant, composed woman I met at the club. She remained oblivious to the spectacle she was causing, continuing to noisily cram her face with gusto. By the end of the interminable meal, Brittany had consumed 3 full entrees, 4 sides, 2 baskets of bread, and untold appetizers. She steadily worked through it all, pausing only to unleash loud, wet belches. Her voracious appetite was matched only by her atrocious manners. Mascara ran down her cheeks, blobs of food stained the front of her dress. She consumed enough for a family of 4. The bill came to well over $500. I reluctantly paid, now regretting bringing this utter stranger to such an upscale restaurant. The ride back to her apartment was painfully silent and awkward. She lolled bonelessly in the passenger seat, absentmindedly patting her grossly bloated stomach and picking at her teeth. At her door, she leaned in expectantly for a kiss, but I dodged it, fabricating some excuse. I couldn't wait to escape from the nightmarish spectacle of a date. Hours later, I texted her saying this wasn't going to work out. What followed was an onslaught of vitriolic messages. She had unleashed a tirade of texts calling me every foul name imaginable. She claimed I was lucky to get a chance with her out of my league self. I was baffled by the over-the-top reaction to one bad date. Figuring that was the end of it, I tried to put the experience behind me. I was very wrong. Over the next few days, my phone practically exploded from the barrage of calls and texts, all from numbers I didn't recognize. They were no doubt her friends. The messages were endless variations of insults and accusations about how I had hurt Brittany. These aggressive strangers promised violence if I didn't pay for my supposed crimes against her. I tried in vain to explain it was just one bad date, but they refused to listen. The relentless harassment was nonstop, no matter how much I pleaded to be left alone. Even after turning my phone off, they always found new numbers to terrorize me from. I became paranoid, jittery about leaving my apartment lest I be jumped. The few times I ventured out, I felt eyes watching me. At home, I lay awake, listening for intruders and pulsing with regret about ever meeting Brittany. One fun night at the club was not worth this fear and anxiety. I still don't understand why she lied to her friends about our date or sent them after me so aggressively. Perhaps she was a narcissist who couldn't handle rejection. Or maybe her ego was so fragile she fabricated a narrative casting herself as the victim. All I know is that outward beauty means nothing without inner substance and self-awareness. When I first saw Maddie saunter into our university lecture hall, I was immediately captivated. Her long, chestnut waves cascaded over her shoulders as she glided to her usual seat near the front, flashing that dimpled smile that made my knees weak. Each Tuesday and Thursday, I'd arrive early just to watch her interact with our classmates, exuding a warmth and lightness that was infectious. Her tinkling laugh seemed to fill up the entire room. I knew I had to work up the courage to talk to her. It took a few weeks of shy smiles and superficial small talk about the weather before I finally introduced myself. I was relieved when Maddie responded enthusiastically, her bright blue eyes lighting up as we chatted about our shared love of indie folk music. Our conversations became longer and more personal as the semester progressed. I lived for those moments, getting to class early so I could snag the seat next to her. She quizzed me on concepts from last week's lecture, her studiousness mixed with playfulness utterly endearing. I found myself confessing things I never told anyone, like my childhood fear of the neighbor's St. Bernard and my secret passion for watercolors. Something about Maddie made me feel safe, like I could bare my soul. When I nervously asked her to dinner, her grin nearly split her face. "I thought you'd never ask," she exclaimed, squeezing my arm gently. My heart fluttered wildly in my chest. I spent the entire week planning out every detail of our date, from what sharp button-down shirt and designer jeans to wear, to mapping out directions to the new farm-to-table restaurant downtown. The night finally arrived and I fidgeted with my carefully combed hair while waiting for Maddie outside the restaurant, checking my watch every 30 seconds. Right on time as she appeared around the corner in a flowy floral sundress that made her glow. The host complimented us on what a stunning couple we made as he led us to our intimate corner table, setting the mood instantly. Over seared scallops and grilled skirt steak, the conversation ebbed and flowed seamlessly. We jumped from dissecting the merits of Christopher Nolan films to wiping tears of laughter at each other's most embarrassing middle school moments. As Maddie twirled her truffle gnocchi, she listened intently to my overzealous retelling of the time I fell off the stage during our 5th grade play, touching my arm gently whenever she giggled at my flailing misfortune. After dessert, I snatched the check before Maddie could even reach for her clutch purse. Always pay for the first date, my dad taught me. I helped Maddie into her cardigan, letting my fingertips linger on her impossibly soft skin. As we strolled to my car, she slipped her arm through mine, sending jolts of electricity up my spine. This was all going perfectly. I followed Maddie's directions towards her place, imagining saying goodnight at her door after walking her up the steps. At first, the stately colonials and pruned hydrangeas seemed like any well-off neighborhood. But gradually the homes grew farther apart, hidden behind drooping trees and overgrown gardens. An uncomfortable pit formed in my stomach as we continued on the narrow road, nothing but shadowy forest surrounding us now. After what felt like hours of darkness, I timidly asked if Maddie was sure this was the right way. She merely gazed out her window in silence, the green glow from the dashboard casting an eerie pallor on her skin. Unease swirled in my gut, but I drove on into the void. Finally, Maddie instructed me to pull onto the gravelly shoulder of a head. Pitch blackness engulfed us on all sides, the lone headlights barely piercing the night. Before I could protest, Maddie ordered me to get out of the car, her once melodic voice now flat and ominous. I froze, gripping the steering wheel in confusion and fear. Suddenly, blinding lights flooded the rear windshield. I whipped around to see a pickup truck inches from my bumper, at least 4 hulking figures climbing out from inside. Their faces were obscured by darkness, but their imposing silhouettes terrified me. Frozen in shock, I fumbled desperately for my keys as the bald, tattooed driver pounded violently on my window. Just as I turned the ignition, a searing pain exploded through my skull. Maddie had smashed something heavy into the back of my head. Warm blood trickled down my neck as she screamed at me to get out. Adrenaline pumping, I shoved open the door aggressively, clipping the bald guy. I sprinted wildly into the woods without looking back, branches tearing my flesh as enraged shouts rang out behind me. I crashed aimlessly through the underbrush for what felt like hours, my lungs burning and Maddie's chilling stare haunting my mind. Finally, a glow emerged ahead. Streetlights. Summoning my last ounce of energy, I bolted harder than ever towards that beacon of hope. I didn't stop running until I collapsed on my own front steps, overwhelmed with shock. My mom later begged me to call the police, but I was too ashamed to admit what had happened on my first date with sweet, innocent Maddie. I still wake up drenched in cold sweat from the nightmares of her empty gaze and the ominous green glow of the dashboard light. I know I'll never gather the courage to ask another girl out again. I should have known things were doomed from the start when I saw his Tinder profile. There were only a couple photos, all awkwardly cropped and poorly lit. His bio was blank, which probably should have been the first red flag. But I was feeling restless that Friday night, bored and lonely in my apartment with nothing to do. So when his shy, expressionless face popped up on my screen, I impulsively swiped right. To my surprise, we matched right away. Before I could even set my phone down, a message from him appeared. Hey, it read simply. I stared at the single word on my screen. Not much of a conversationalist, I thought, but I was already committed, so I typed back a friendly hi. His response was quick, almost too quick. Wanted me up for a drink. I hesitated, debating whether I really wanted to go through with this, but it was just a casual first date, I reasoned. What's the worst that could happen? We made plans to meet at a bar down the street from me the next night. I arrived right on time, smoothing down my dress and taking a deep breath before entering. It wasn't crowded, and I immediately spotted him sitting alone at a table, staring down at his phone intently. He didn't notice me right away, and I took a moment to assess him. He was average height, average build, average looking, but he seemed tense, his shoulders hunched forward and his leg bouncing under the table. I finally walked over, offering a smile. Hey, I'm Claire. I introduced myself. He glanced up quickly, muttering, hey, without meeting my eyes. He didn't offer his name in return. I sat down across from him awkwardly. A bartender came by to get our drinks, just beers for both of us. The conversation was stilted and strained. I kept trying to get him to open up, asking him basic small talk questions about work, hobbies, where he was from. But his answers were short and monotone, sometimes barely more than one word. After about an hour of struggling attempts to keep things flowing, he finally spoke unprompted. Do you maybe want to get out of here? He asked. We could go back to my place if you want. Have another drink there. I hesitated again. His energy put me on edge, but I told myself I was probably overreacting. I followed him out to his car, an old beater covered in scrapes and dents. The interior smelled like stale cigarettes. As we drove, I tried to make polite conversation about the neighborhood. He responded with grunts, focused intently on the road. I felt a knot in my stomach grow tighter the closer we got to his place. Something felt off, but before I could fully process the bad vibes I was getting, he was parking the car outside a run-down apartment building. I swallowed my hesitation and followed him inside and up 3 flights of creaky stairs. The first thing I noticed was the smell, a strange, pungent odor I couldn't quite place. It got stronger the closer we got to his apartment door. By the time he let us in, it was nearly overpowering. I tried not to visibly react as I followed him inside, even as the stench turned my stomach. The apartment was dim and disheveled. Stacks of newspapers and food containers were scattered around haphazardly. The kitchen sink was piled high with greasy dishes. He led me toward a closed door in the hallway, what I presumed was the bedroom. I lingered near the front door, suddenly desperate for an escape. Actually, it's getting pretty late, I said hurriedly. I should really get home. He paused, looking back at me with an unreadable expression. For a moment, he just stared at me in silence. Okay, sure, he finally replied flatly. I can take you back. I exhaled in relief. We walked back out to his car, the smell from his apartment still lingering in my nose. As soon as I got home, I hurried to the bathroom sink to wash it off. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to shake that uneasy feeling that had clung to me all evening. There had been such an odd vibe about that guy and his place. And that smell, what could it have been? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. I always tried to give people the benefit of the doubt, but everything about him had been off. In the harsh light of day, my unease didn't dissipate. On the contrary, the more I replayed the night, the more certain I became that something wasn't right. Before I could think too hard, I found myself searching online for his name, digging for anything that might explain the bad feeling in my gut. I couldn't find much, no social media, no local records. But I did stumble onto one news article from a few towns over about police discovering human remains in an apartment. The tenant's name, a direct match. My heart stuttered. Human remains, as in a dead body. I sat stunned for a moment, my pulse pounding in my ears. Surely it had to be a different person with the same name, right? But try as I might, I couldn't shake the gruesome thought now burned into my brain, along with the implication that I had narrowly escaped being alone with this man. I considered calling the police, but what would I even tell them? I had no proof this was the same person, other than a name match. Still, I couldn't let it go. What if I had information that could actually help someone? In the end, I settled for an anonymous tip about the smell in his apartment, providing the vague details. The local police could decide whether to pursue it. At least I would know that I did something. I deleted my Tinder after that night. No more impulsive swiping for strangers in the name of boredom. From now on, I told myself I would be more careful, listen to my instincts when something felt off. I'd escaped unscathed, but it was a startling reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind innocent facades. A lesson learned, if the hard way. I haven't been on a date in what feels like forever. Between work, friends, and general business, my love life has been on the back burner. But when my buddy Jacob set me up with his girlfriend's friend Jessica, I figured why not give dating another shot. Jessica seemed nice enough from what Jacob had told me about her. Plus, she was really cute in the few photos I'd seen. We exchanged numbers and started texting to make plans for our first date. The conversation flowed pretty well over text, so I took that as a good sign. We decided to meet up on a Friday night at a trendy Spanish tapas place downtown. I arrived about 10 minutes early to put our name on the wait list for a table. Luckily, we didn't have to wait long before the hostess led me to a cozy two-top by the bar. I sipped on a glass of Rioja as I waited for Jessica to arrive. Right on time, I saw her walk in the front door. She looked just as pretty as her photos, with long brown hair and bright green eyes. I waved her over and she gave me a warm smile. We started chatting right away about working and marketing, our mutual friends, and where we grew up. The conversation came easily, which is always a good sign for a first date. I really liked Jessica's sarcastic sense of humor and how passionate she was about her work. As we ate tapas and drank sangria, I felt like we were really hitting it off. After dinner, I asked Jessica if she wanted to go grab a drink at a cool speakeasy bar just down the street. She said yes without hesitation, so I took that as a good sign that she was having fun too. We walked over to the bar and grabbed seats at a small high-top table. I ordered an old-fashioned while Jessica got a Moscow Mule. The drinks were strong, but delicious. Jessica and I ended up talking for hours, moving from work chatter to debating out movies to deeper conversations about family and friends. I loved how we could go from bantering and making each other laugh one minute to having serious talks the next. The time flew by quickly. Around midnight, I noticed the bar was starting to empty out. I asked Jessica if she wanted me to give her a ride home since we both had a few drinks. This is when the night took an unexpected turn. Jessica's whole demeanor changed at my suggestion to drive her home. She shifted uncomfortably and gave me a wary look. Why would you want to know where I live?" she asked in an accusatory tone. I was completely taken aback by her sudden suspicion. I tried to explain that I just wanted to be a gentleman and make sure she got home safe after drinking, but she clearly wasn't having it. The more I tried to reassure her I had no ulterior motive, the more freaked out Jessica seemed to get. She started rapid-fire questioning me about why I really wanted to know of her address and saying how sketchy it was. I honestly didn't know how to respond. We had just spent the whole night laughing and really seeming to hit it off. Where was this sudden paranoia coming from? Trying to diffuse the weird tension, I told Jessica, "You know what, don't worry about it. Let me just call you an Uber." I gave the driver her address and said goodbye, utterly confused at how things had taken such a sharp turn. When I got home that night, I texted Jessica saying I had a really nice time and would love to see her again sometime. But I'd noticed my messages never delivered to her. The next morning, I tried messaging Jessica through the dating app where we first connected, but it said she had unmatched me. She blocked me after one fun date. That seemed like a pretty over-the-top reaction. I was disappointed since I thought Jessica and I had really hit it off. But I figured she just wasn't feeling it for whatever reason and decided to move on. Rejection is part of dating, even if her blocking me seemed unnecessarily harsh. A few weekends later, I was at a big house party hosted by a mutual friend. I noticed Jessica across the room talking to some people. Just to be polite, I walked up to say a casual, "Hey, how's it going?" Immediately, Jessica's eyes flashed with anger. "Are you ********ing stalking me right now?" she yelled. I was so taken aback, I just stood there speechless. That's when Jessica started loudly accusing me of harassing her ever since our date. She was making a scene, telling people I was dangerous and unhinged. I was completely blindsided and humiliated. I tried to explain it was simply a coincidence we were at the same party, but Jessica insisted I had been obsessively tracking her down. All our friends were staring, looking at me like I was some kind of psycho. I ended up slipping out early while Jessica continued her tirade about me being a stalker. I was rattled and confused about why she had reacted so strongly. We had one normal date, nothing more. What would make her vilify me like this? After that night, I was seriously shaken up. The experience made me wary about getting back out there and trying to date again. I finally put myself out there after taking time off from romance, only to have this girl I barely knew turn me into a villain in front of all our friends. Maybe Jessica had been harassed in the past, so she assumed the worst of me. Or maybe the drinks had impaired her judgment. I really don't know. All I know is the first date went well, then she freaked out over nothing and slandered me. Dating can be such a roller coaster ride. One minute you're really hitting it off with someone, the next they're accusing you of being a creepy stalker. I'm hoping my next first date has a happier ending, but Jessica definitely left me rattled. Here's to keeping the faith that not every woman I go out with will think I'm a predator. Fingers crossed the next one goes smoothly and no craziness ensues.